In the shadowy world of World War II, as the fate of nations hung in the balance, British spies employed a daring strategy that altered the course of history. 9. Why British spies sent wrong messages to the Germans and won the War of Information unveils how misinformation became a powerful weapon in the hands of intelligence operatives. While some characters in this narrative are fictionalized for storytelling purposes, the events themselves are grounded in reality. Explore how deception and creativity in communication disrupted the plans of German forces, showcasing the vital role of information warfare in achieving victory. To immerse yourself in this captivating tale, subscribe to our channel. Gain access to well-researched facts, uncover rare perspectives, and enjoy clear explanations of intricate historical events. With regular uploads, you'll deepen your understanding of the past and discover how these lessons resonate today. Don't miss out. Join our community of history enthusiasts now. In the early years of the Second World War, the struggle for information was as critical to the outcome of the conflict as the battles fought on land, sea, and air. At the heart of this struggle was a deliberate British effort to sow disinformation among German forces. This undertaking was rooted in the understanding that the enemy's perception of reality could be manipulated to affect their decisions, which in turn could influence the broader course of the war. British intelligence operatives realized that the best weapon was not simply the collection of enemy secrets, but the artful crafting of falsehoods that would lead German commanders to make strategic blunders, often at a great cost. One of the earliest and most successful applications of this strategy emerged from Operation Fortitude, part of the Allied deception plan surrounding the D-Day landings. The Allies recognized that the Germans were heavily reliant on signals intelligence, relying on intercepted communications to inform their decisions. In response, British intelligence developed a false narrative suggesting that the main Allied assault would occur at Calais, rather than the actual invasion point in Normandy. To reinforce this ruse, they carefully choreographed a series of misleading messages that would be intercepted and interpreted by German codebreakers. These messages, filled with details of fictitious troop movements and manufactured equipment placements, painted a compelling picture that diverted the enemy's attention in the crucial weeks leading up to the invasion. One of the pivotal figures in this operation was an officer named John Masterman, who oversaw the 20 Committee, so named because it involved both double agents and their handlers, all tasked with feeding the Germans a steady stream of misinformation. Masterman understood that the success of their deception relied not solely on convincing the enemy, but also on crafting a sense of inevitability around the false intelligence. For instance, the British abandoned traditional modes of communication when it suited their purposes, opting instead for dramatic broadcasts via radio that were made to sound authentic, complete with the sound of military vehicles or even the fake chatter of soldiers. This attention to detail ensured that the German forces would take the bait, reinforcing the belief that a massive assault was poised to strike at Calais while their defences in Normandy were left vulnerable. The psychological dimension of this strategy cannot be overstated. The British spies knew that humans are creatures of habit, shaped by patterns of belief and action. The Germans were no different. They had developed a framework for anticipating Allied moves that had become almost automatic over years of conflict. By exploiting this framework, British intelligence introduced confusion that could lead to paralysis in decision-making. The mere suggestion that a different front would open could resonate through the ranks, affecting morale and logistics. As German troops were shifted to positions where they were unlikely to be needed, the Allies were able to land and establish a foothold in Normandy with far less resistance than anticipated. The ramifications of this disinformation campaign extended beyond immediate tactical advantages. They also contributed to a broader narrative of the war that underscored the Allies' resourcefulness. This was particularly important in the context of securing support from neutral countries and bolstering morale among Allied troops. As the Allies emerged victorious from the landings in Normandy, tales of clever deception and calculated misinformation began circulating, painting the British intelligence community not just as a group of spies, but as ingenious strategists capable of turning the tide of war through sheer cunning. This characterization served to further demoralize the German forces, who began to see their own intelligence capabilities as inadequate. Behind this veil of deception lay the intricate mechanics of espionage that the British had so skillfully woven. The use of double agents became a cornerstone of their strategy. Agents like Juan Pujol Garcia, known as Garbo, became influential figures who not only relayed misleading information back to their German handlers, but also cultivated a persona that inspired trust and credibility. Through his elaborate falsehoods concerning troop dispositions and the timing of the invasion, he was able to lead German intelligence into a profound miscalculation. None of this would have been possible without the commitment for the greater goal, a demonstration of how individual lives could be woven into the fabric of a much larger conflict. Yet this web of deception was not without its risks. The more elaborate the ruse, the more intricate the threads that needed to be spun convincingly. Mistakes could unravel the entire operation, leading to catastrophic consequences on the battlefield. As British intelligence officers crafted their fabrications, they had to maintain a delicate balance between evoking enough realism to convince the German forces while ensuring that their own troops were not unduly influenced by the same misinformation. Communication and coordination between various departments became crucial as the stakes grew higher with each passing day. By the time the invasion commenced, the effects of these carefully calculated messages were palpable. German troops, responding to the barrage of misleading information crafted by British intelligence, found themselves disorganized and poorly positioned. The deception campaign not only diverted their resources, but also instilled a sense of confusion that would echo through command ranks in the critical hours of the landings. As British forces hit the beaches of Normandy, they were met with less resistance than anticipated, a testament to the successful execution of a strategy built on the belief that one could win not just by arms, but also through the artful manipulation of information. Through the early summer of 1944, as the Allies pressed ahead, the significance of this strategic deception became increasingly evident. The campaign had transformed from a mere sideline of intelligence work into a decisive factor that shaped the course of the war. This intricate dance of misinformation illustrated that in the theater of war, victory was as much about what was believed as what was actually there. The blurred lines between truth and falsehood became weapons in their own right, offering proof that the power of perception could alter the realities of conflict. In the end, British spies had not only won a battle in the arena of military strategy, but had also redefined the very nature of warfare itself, where information became a battlefield unto itself. As the war in Europe progressed, the British intelligence community recognized that information warfare was becoming as crucial as traditional military engagements. The establishment of the Special Operations Executive, SOE, in 1940 underscored the importance of unconventional tactics, which included the deliberate dissemination of misleading information. This strategy was not merely a side pursuit. It became a central tenet of British military doctrine. By creating a facade of plausible deception, British intelligence sought to obscure their actual capabilities and intentions, thereby creating a psychological advantage over German forces. One of the most prominent examples of this strategy was the use of the double-cross system, which involved the recruitment of enemy agents. Rather than executing captured German spies, British intelligence would turn them into double agents. These operatives were instructed to feed misinformation back to their handlers in Germany. This method proved exceptionally effective, as it allowed British intelligence to mislead German commanders about the Allies' strategic intentions. They could fabricate stories of troop movements or fake operations that diverted German resources away from the actual points of Allied assault. The most notable case of this was the elaborate deception surrounding the Normandy landings in June 1944. Operation Fortitude, a critical component of the D-Day invasion, was designed to convince German forces that the Allies would strike at Pas-de-Calais instead of Normandy. The use of inflatable tanks, fake radio transmissions, and even the creation of a fictitious First United States Army group gave the impression of a vast military presence where none existed. German intelligence was effectively drawn into believing this ruse, leading them to commit significant forces to the wrong location. By the time of the actual landings, the Allies had a crucial advantage, facilitating one of the most significant military operations in history. The deception did not stop at military operations. It extended into every facet of the war effort. The British government, in collaboration with various agencies, made extensive use of propaganda to shape perceptions about the war and bolster morale at home and among the broader Allied forces. The information spread about the supposed strength and resolve of the German military was often exaggerated or completely fabricated. Meanwhile, the true devastation that Allied forces were capable of inflicting was downplayed, thereby preserving the element of surprise and maintaining the morale of both troops and civilians. In the midst of these elaborate deceptions, the British also engaged in psychological operations, targeting German troops directly. Leaflets were dropped from planes, encouraging defections and sowing doubt within the ranks of the enemy. The messages often highlighted the futility of the struggle against the overwhelming Allied forces. This strategy of sowing dissent was designed to erode the will to fight among German soldiers, turning their own doubts and fears against them. By the end of the war, many German troops were disheartened, feeling abandoned and questioning the ideology for which they had fought. Central to the success of these operations was the British understanding of the importance of information in shaping the wartime narrative. The flow of incorrect intelligence to German command had a ripple effect, as commanders would often act on assumptions influenced by the misinformation they received. This created a scenario where even minor errors or misjudgments could culminate in disastrous decisions on the battlefield. British High Command understood that for every piece of false intelligence that reached German forces, there was a concurrent benefit for their own strategic aims, creating a perfect storm of tactical advantage. Yet, the intricacies of this psychological battle extended beyond mere military tactics. The cultural implications of such strategies were profound, as they forced both sides to continually reassess the nature of truth and reality in warfare. The British employed deception not just as a tool for victory, but as a way to redefine honor and valiance in this new era of conflict. This psychological war had its own set of rules, and those who mastered them were often the victors, for they controlled not only the battlefield, but also the narrative that surrounded it. The stakes were high, and the ramifications of misinformation were reflected in both successes and failures. The British were acutely aware that the burden of truth in warfare was often obscured by the necessity of survival. They knew the war was not just about winning battles, but also about winning the hearts and minds of both their own population and that of enemy soldiers. The careful orchestration of messages would ultimately shape public perception and fuel the war effort, creating a legacy that would define the post-war world. With each passing month, the comprehensive strategy of misinformation began to crystallize into a formidable weapon. The British intelligence community, driven by a blend of desperation and brilliance, reshaped the landscape of warfare, focusing on the psychological dimensions of conflict. They understood that in a world ravaged by war, the ability to control the narrative was tantamount to wielding a powerful sword against an enemy that could be just as formidable as any artillery or tank. In this environment, the war of information became not just a tactic, but a pivotal element of the Allied strategy that would ultimately steer the course of the conflict. As the tide of the Second World War turned against the Axis powers, British intelligence officials became increasingly adept at exploiting the nuances of psychological warfare. They recognized that the war was not solely fought on the battlefields of Europe. It extended into the minds of the enemy. It was here that disinformation campaigns played a pivotal role, and one strategy that emerged was the deliberate act of sending misleading messages to German commanders. Through careful calibration of information, British spies sought to create an environment of confusion within German military ranks. One of the more cunning operations involved the creation of fictitious units. For instance, the British devised an elaborate scheme around the fictitious 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, a phantom army that was ostensibly preparing for a significant invasion of France. The Allies conducted extensive deception operations to make FUSAG appear credible, including deploying inflatable tanks, fake aircraft, and even convincing radio intercepts that suggested an imminent assault. The aim was to draw German forces away from the actual invasion site in Normandy, thereby ensuring the operation's success. This intricate web of deception was bolstered by the collaboration of numerous intelligence officers, including the brilliant mind of Colonel John Bevan, who understood that, in war, the perception of strength could hold more power than actual numbers. In addition to the creation of ghost armies, British spies employed cunning techniques of misdirection in their communications. The famous double-cross system turned captured German agents into double agents, who would then feed false information back to their handlers in Germany. One notable figure in this scheme was Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo. Although initially perceived as unreliable, he ultimately became one of the most influential double agents, convincing German intelligence of a non-existent buildup of Allied forces in the weeks leading up to D-Day. His elaborate tales of deploying troops and misleading intelligence reports contributed significantly to the enemy's miscalculations. As the war progressed, the British also skillfully used captured documents and decoded messages to their advantage. The breaking of the Enigma code allowed British intelligence to read German communications, a significant breakthrough that altered the landscape of information warfare. However, once they gained access to this intelligence, the British were careful to release selective information back to the Germans, feeding them half-truths and calculated inaccuracies that would lead to strategic errors. This practice of cherry-picking information not only sowed discord and distrust within German ranks, but also allowed the Allies to anticipate and counter enemy maneuvers effectively. The psychological warfare waged through these disinformation tactics extended beyond the battlefield. The British government understood that news and propaganda could significantly influence public morale on both sides. They orchestrated a campaign designed to bolster Allied resolve while simultaneously demoralizing German troops. Leaflets dropped from planes announced false Allied victories, while radio broadcasts highlighted the struggles and dissent within Germany. These efforts sought to undermine the confidence of German soldiers and citizens alike, reinforcing the notion that the war was not one they could win. Another remarkable aspect of this information war was the symbolic weight of ordinary items. In one operation, British intelligence orchestrated the release of a fabricated letter purportedly written by a high-ranking German officer, outlining an impending defeat. This letter, although entirely false, served to capture the imagination of both the enemy and the Allies. It became a symbol of the German High Command's fear and confusion, further propagating the idea that surrender was inevitable. The psychological impact of such artifacts was profound, shaping narratives that resonated through both military and civilian spheres. Throughout these operations, the moral complexities of deception weighed heavily on British leaders. As they grappled with the ethics of their strategies, many recognized that the line between right and wrong became increasingly blurred. Intelligence Chief Sir Stuart Menzies once remarked that the war was not just about fighting, it is about winning hearts and minds. This sentiment encapsulated the duality of their mission: to protect their own while dismantling the enemy's resolve through carefully orchestrated lies. With each misleading message, the British spies engaged not only in tactical warfare, but also in a broader existential struggle for truth in a world colored by propaganda. In the closing stages of the war, the fidelity of information became an increasingly vital asset. As British forces swept through Europe, the echoes of their disinformation campaigns reverberated loudly. The German command, once confident in their strategic prowess, found themselves floundering in a sea of contradictions, unable to ascertain friend from foe. This chaos was not merely the product of military might, but a carefully orchestrated symphony of deception, intricately composed over years of warfare. Victory in the war of information was not just about the successful execution of these campaigns, but about the lasting legacy they forged. Through disinformation, the British intelligence apparatus demonstrated that information itself could be a weapon, wielding the power to shape perceptions and ultimately outcomes. The art of misleading, once perceived as an act of dishonor, transformed into a celebrated strategy that would influence modern military practices. In reflecting on these operations, one realizes that the essence of warfare transcends the physical realm, residing deeply within the minds of those who wage it. As the war progressed, British intelligence increasingly relied on deception to mold the perceptions of German forces. One pivotal strategy involved Operation Mincemeat, which, while not a direct component of the larger information war, exemplified the lengths to which British spies would go to mislead their opponents. In April 1943, Allied operatives executed a daring plan that involved planting false documents on a corpse dressed as a Royal Marine. The documents suggested an Allied invasion of Greece, diverting German attention from the actual target, Sicily. The successful execution of this elaborate ruse hinged on meticulous planning and a deep understanding of German strategic priorities, showcasing the British capacity for nuanced psychological operations that extended beyond mere disinformation. The deployment of these tactics was not without risk. Failure could result not only in the loss of lives, but also the exposure of British intelligence methods. The team behind Operation Mincemeat not only created convincing documents, but also fashioned an entire persona for the deceased, complete with backstory and personal effects, thereby enhancing the credibility of the ruse. This meticulous attention to detail reflected the broader ethos of British intelligence operations, that the power of suggestion could be as potent as direct military confrontation. The operation culminated in a successful misdirection that led to the Allied victory in Sicily, ultimately showcasing the significance of psychological warfare in the theater of conflict. Meanwhile, other forms of information warfare supplemented these grand deceptions. The British employed a network of double agents whom they codenamed the double-cross system. This network included a plethora of individuals, some of whom had genuine connections to German intelligence, and others who were entirely fabricated. By carefully managing these agents, British intelligence fed misinformation directly into German communication lines, creating an intertwined narrative that the enemy found increasingly challenging to navigate. This approach not only sowed confusion, but also cultivated a sense of false security among German commanders who mistakenly believed they had firm intelligence about Allied movements. One of the most remarkable aspects of this network was its ability to fabricate events that seemed plausible. For example, false reports of impending Allied bombardments could effectively redirect German troop deployments as commanders scrambled to reinforce vulnerable locations. The impact of this strategy was profound. It not only diluted German military efficacy, but also fostered an atmosphere of uncertainty, whereby even the best-laid plans could falter under the weight of doubt. The psychological ramifications of such misinformation were significant, shaking the confidence of German leadership and contributing to a slow degradation of their operational capabilities. Symbolically, the British maneuvering through the ether of deceit mirrored the very essence of the broader conflict. The war was not merely a series of battles, but a clash of narratives. The ability to tell a convincing story could alter the course of events far more than sheer force. British strategists understood that each piece of misinformation was akin to a chess move, where anticipating the enemy's responses could yield strategic advantages. The stakes of this cognitive battlefield were high, as German commanders often operated under the assumption that they were accurately assessing the situation, when in reality they were ensnared in elaborate feints. Further complicating the dynamics of this information war was the role of media. The British established a sophisticated propaganda machine that leveraged newspapers, films, and broadcasts to shape public perceptions both domestically and abroad. This effort was not merely a matter of morale. It served to reinforce the narratives that British intelligence sought to propagate. An informed populace could rally around the war effort, while simultaneously denying the enemy any narrative foothold that could inspire confidence or morale. As such, the British narrative became intertwined with the perception of victory, creating an atmosphere where optimism could flourish amidst the grim realities of war. The British spies' triumph in the War of Information also illuminated the inherent limitations of traditional military intelligence. The German forces, despite their formidable capabilities, often underestimated the value of deception and the psychological dimensions of warfare. This oversight offered British operatives a unique opportunity. By embracing non-conventional strategies, they maneuvered through the fog of battle, outsmarting an enemy that was still wedded to a more linear conception of conflict. The result was a series of strategic victories that would shift the momentum of the war, illustrating how understanding human psychology and perception could redefine the rules of engagement. As the Allies prepared for D-Day in 1944, the culmination of these intelligence operations came to a head. The success of the Normandy landings was predicated not only on military strategy, but also on an intricate web of misinformation, wherein the German forces were led to believe that the main assault would occur at Pas-de-Calais rather than the beaches of Normandy. This strategic deception, known as Operation Bodyguard, further exemplified the mastery of British intelligence in crafting a narrative that effectively obscured reality. As the Allied forces stormed the beaches, they were not merely engaging in a military operation. They were reaping the rewards of years of cunning and creativity in the art of information warfare. In the spring of 1943, the British intelligence apparatus was at a critical juncture. The momentum of the war had begun to shift, and the stakes of information warfare were climbing to unprecedented heights. The leadership in London understood that the Germans were adept at intercepting communications, which made the crafting of misleading messages not merely a tactic, but a necessity for survival. This realization birthed an audacious initiative known as Operation Fortitude, a masterstroke of deception that would lay the groundwork for the Allied invasion of Normandy. British intelligence sought to convince German forces that the main thrust of the invasion would occur at the Pas-de-Calais rather than at the vulnerable beaches of Normandy. positioning the latter as a mere diversion. One of the key players in this elaborate charade was the double agent Juan Pujol Garcia, who operated under the codename Garbo. Pujol was a figure of intrigue, having initially approached the British with intentions of espionage before becoming an agent for the Allies. His ability to weave elaborate stories and fabricate a network of non-existent spies allowed him to create an illusion of a large-scale build-up of forces in Britain. His reports, laced with misleading information, were so convincing that German military intelligence, known as Abwehr, began to rely on them as credible sources, swaying strategic decisions at the highest levels. The British were not merely crafting falsehoods, they were building a narrative that would shape the perceptions and actions of their enemy. As the summer of 1943 approached, the British implemented a series of feints and fabricated movements to reinforce the illusion of an imminent attack in the Pas-de-Calais. Dummy tanks made of inflatable materials were deployed in strategic locations. These decoys, combined with clever radio transmissions and the calculated timing of feigned military maneuvers, created the impression of a massive, entrenched force preparing for an assault. The symbolism of these inflated facsimiles was profound. They represented a pivotal belief among British strategists that the mind could be as potent a weapon as the firearm. This philosophy positioned psychological warfare at the center of their military strategy. In the months leading up to D-Day, the British continued to flood German communications with misinformation. The creation of a fictitious army, ostensibly led by General Patton, was key to this endeavor. The Germans believed that the Allies were preparing to invade through the Pas-de-Calais, drawn by the semblance of an overwhelming force they could not comprehend as fiction. This misdirection would culminate on June 6, 1944, with the actual landings at Normandy, which caught German forces by surprise. The meticulous orchestrations of British intelligence established a narrative that made the Germans second-guess their own command and control processes. Crucially, the success of Operation Fortitude was not only due to the innovative tactics employed, but also to the sheer volume of deception. The British understood that if one thread of misinformation unraveled, countless layers of confusion would still shroud the truth. By saturating the enemy with conflicting signals, they created an environment where clarity was impossible. This relentless barrage is emblematic of the broader war effort. The Allies sought not only to defeat the enemy, but to undermine their confidence at every turn. The act of sowing doubt proved more disorienting than any battlefield confrontation could achieve. Moreover, the use of operational misdirection underscored a crucial lesson in the war of information. It was not enough to simply present falsehoods. They had to be plausible enough to be believed. The British succeeded in this respect by emphasizing the realistic logistics, suggesting troop movements, supply lines, and even rations that would be needed for a large-scale assault. The details mattered. They shaped a narrative that was not only credible, but also irresistible to the German high command, who, caught in their own web of assumptions, failed to discern the ruse until it was too late. As the Allied forces secured their foothold on the beaches of Normandy, the consequences of the deception began to unravel before the German military leadership. The loss of men and material attributed to their misjudgments based on British misinformation would reverberate throughout subsequent campaigns. The psychological impact of this failure was significant, leading to a gradual erosion of trust within the ranks of the German forces. This undermining of morale was not merely a byproduct of a single battle. It contributed to a broader crisis of confidence that would manifest as the war progressed. In the aftermath of D-Day, the Allies cultivated their victories not only through brute force, but through the remnants of their elaborate deception campaigns. The lessons learned in the realm of psychological warfare became foundational in post-war military doctrine. The significance of the information war, as demonstrated through British ingenuity and the strategic deployment of misinformation, redefined the nature of conflict itself, illustrating how the control of perception could be a decisive factor in warfare. Thus, in the historical tapestry of World War II, the efforts of British spies who sent wrong messages to the German forces transcended the realm of mere intrigue. They emerged as a testament to the power of intelligence, strategy, and the complexities of human interaction in times of conflict. The echoes of this clandestine battle continue to resonate, compelling future generations to confront the nuances of truth and deception in their own narratives. In the final years of the war, the strategic battle of information reached a crescendo as British intelligence intensified its operations to mislead German forces. The foundation of this campaign lay in the understanding that control of information could be as decisive as the control of territory. The British devised elaborate schemes to create a facade of strength while masking their vulnerabilities. A notable example was Operation Fortitude, which orchestrated a deceptive display of military build-up in southeast England, suggesting imminent attacks across the Strait of Dover. The Germans interpreted these signals as concrete proof of an impending invasion, directing their resources and attention toward the wrong front. This crucial misdirection created space for the Allied forces to prepare for their actual assault on Normandy. Central to the success of these deceptions was the utilization of double agents, whose roles in the espionage network became instrumental in feeding false intelligence back to the German command. One of the most prominent figures, Juan Pujol Garcia, known to the British as Garbo, orchestrated a complex web of lies that convinced German intelligence of a fictitious army stationed in southeastern England. Each report he sent was meticulously crafted, built upon the slightest whispers of military movements and details that lent credibility to his fabrications. The success of Garbo and his fellow agents was not merely a stroke of luck. It was the result of a carefully structured approach to espionage that recognized the importance of credibility in the realm of information warfare. The psychological effects of these deceptions extended beyond immediate tactical advantages. They sowed seeds of doubt among German leaders regarding their own intelligence capabilities, fostering a growing sense of paranoia and mistrust within the ranks. As high-ranking officials grappled with the relentless barrage of misinformation, their decision-making became increasingly reactive and erratic. This erosion of confidence was exacerbated by the pervasive atmosphere of uncertainty as the German command struggled to discern the truth amid the obfuscated reality projected by British spies. Such internal discord culminated in strategic blunders that would ultimately handicap German military operations at critical junctures. One of the key symbols of this battle was the use of dummy tanks and aircraft, which were strategically placed to create the illusion of a formidable Allied presence. These inflatable decoys were meticulously designed to withstand aerial reconnaissance, projecting an image of strength while requiring minimal resources to maintain. The Germans, relying on their reconnaissance capabilities, fell victim to this elaborate ruse, reinforcing their incorrect assumptions about the Allied strategy. This clever manipulation of perception reflected a broader philosophical understanding of warfare. That belief often holds more weight than reality itself. The mere sight of these deceptions was enough to provoke a cascade of defensive responses from the German command, further cementing the effectiveness of the British strategy. Moreover, the British intelligence services understood the limitations of their adversaries' information networks. German intelligence was heavily bureaucratic, often stifled by internal rivalries and an over-reliance on established procedures. This rigidity made them susceptible to the fluid and adaptive tactics employed by British operatives. The British, in contrast, were able to pivot quickly in response to shifting circumstances. By cultivating a network of sources and employing innovative techniques, they could present a constantly evolving narrative to the enemy, keeping them off balance. It was a masterclass in agility, a stark contrast to the lumbering behemoth of German military intelligence. As Allied forces landed on D-Day, the culmination of these efforts was revealed in the chaos that ensued. German forces were caught unprepared, their resources spread too thin across multiple fronts created by British deception. Even as Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, senior German commanders remained convinced that the real invasion would occur elsewhere, believing all the while that they were successfully defending against an imagined threat. This critical misalignment between perception and reality not only enabled the success of the landings, but also marked a turning point in the war, shifting momentum decisively in favor of the Allies. In the aftermath of D-Day, the psychological triumph of the British strategy became evident. The successful implementation of misinformation not only thwarted immediate military objectives, but also had lasting implications. It served as an early example of the significance of psychological operations in modern warfare, illuminating the necessity of understanding the perceptions of both allies and adversaries. The narrative crafted by British intelligence during this era underscored the belief that controlling the information landscape could lead to victory on the battlefield. The legacy of these operations extended beyond the immediate context of World War II. They would influence military strategy for decades to come. The principles of deception and the manipulation of information gained renewed attention during the Cold War, as countries grappled with similar challenges of perception and truth in their international relations. Moreover, historians and military strategists have continued to analyze and learn from these tactics, recognizing the evolving nature of information warfare in an increasingly interconnected world. Ultimately, the British efforts in the War of Information exemplified a profound understanding of human psychology and the intricacies of intelligence. The delicate balance of truth and deception, belief and reality, became the cornerstone of their strategy, allowing them to exploit the vulnerabilities of the German command. In doing so, they not only achieved military successes, but also reshaped the very landscape of warfare, illustrating the power of information in determining the outcomes of conflict. As the Second World War progressed, the British intelligence community recognized the critical role of deception in shaping the battlefield. The success of their operations was not determined solely by the gathering of information, but also by how that information was manipulated and disseminated. The culmination of these efforts materialized in operations such as Fortitude, which served as a key aspect of the Allied strategy leading up to the D-Day landings at Normandy in June 1944. This operation was underpinned by an intricate web of misinformation that would mislead German forces about the true location and timing of the invasion, drawing their attention away from the launch site in Normandy to a phantom threat in Pas-de-Calais. Fortitude was divided into two parts, Fortitude North and Fortitude South. Each segment aimed to create the illusion of significant Allied military forces poised to attack from both northern and southern fronts. For instance, Fortitude North sought to convince German intelligence that an invasion force was preparing to strike Norway, prompting German commanders to divert resources to a region that would never see Allied troops. The meticulous planning and execution of these operations required an understanding of how German military intelligence operated and an anticipation of their responses. British planners constructed fictitious divisions, complete with fabricated equipment and even false radio traffic, to build an elaborate picture of an Allied presence that did not exist. The psychological component of Fortitude cannot be overstated. British intelligence officers understood that the perception of strength could often outweigh the actual presence of troops. The British made judicious use of double agents, such as Juan Pujol Garcia, known as Garbo, who played a pivotal role in feeding misleading information to the Germans. This network of operatives was critical in cultivating a sense of inevitability about the threat of invasion elsewhere, serving as a psychological deterrent against German forces. Garbo's deceptions were so effective that they led to the Germans believing they were facing a large and imminent attack at multiple sites, contributing to critical misallocations of resources. Technical ingenuity also played a significant role in the War of Information. The British used dummy tanks and inflatable aircraft to create the illusion of a large army massing for an invasion. The landscape of southern England was transformed by these decoys, which were so convincing that aerial reconnaissance missions were unable to detect any discrepancies. The strategic placement of these decoys was no accident. They were meticulously staged to mislead German aerial surveillance and were accompanied by a barrage of misleading radio transmissions, creating a holistic picture of impending military maneuvers. This fusion of technology and human intelligence exemplified the sophistication of British deception operations and their reliance on creating a reality that existed only in the minds of their adversaries. Compounding the success of these deceptions was the inherent difficulty in discerning truth from falsehood in the fog of war. The German command structure often struggled with conflicting reports, further exacerbated by a culture of secrecy and distrust within its own ranks. As misinformation flowed in, it was filtered through a lens of suspicion that sometimes led to grave errors in judgment. This created a feedback loop where the distortions sown by British intelligence became self-reinforcing. The Germans' attempts to interpret these false narratives often resulted in decisions that were misaligned with the realities of the battlefield, leading to catastrophic consequences during the Allied landings. In the lead-up to D-Day, the Allies undertook a final push in their campaign of deception. Operation Bodyguard was a broader strategy encompassing fortitude, wherein false operations were designed to confuse and mislead German reconnaissance efforts. This included the creation of a fake invasion fleet that was intended to reinforce the idea of a dual invasion. The Allies coordinated air and naval units to simulate activity in areas far removed from the actual landing site in Normandy. The result was a tapestry of misinformation that entangled the German command in a web of uncertainty, forcing them to maintain a defensive posture at multiple points, while simultaneously lacking a clear understanding of where the real threat lay. The aftermath of these operations bore witness to the tangible results of British ingenuity in the realm of information warfare. When the Allied forces finally landed on June 6, 1944, they were met with staggeringly light resistance in Normandy, an outcome that was largely attributable to the success of the previous month's deceptions. German troops, having been led to believe that the main assault would occur elsewhere, found themselves poorly positioned to mount an effective defense against the actual invasion. This disarray not only facilitated a successful beach landing, but also established a foothold that would become pivotal for the liberation of Western Europe. The legacy of these deception operations extends beyond their immediate tactical successes. They ushered in a new understanding of the importance of information warfare within modern military strategies. The British experience during the Second World War became a touchstone for future conflicts, illustrating how perceptions could be molded into realities that had far-reaching consequences. The intricate dance of misdirection, duplicity, and psychological manipulation served as a blueprint for subsequent generations of military strategists, emphasizing that the war for information could be as significant as the one fought on the battlefield. The British intelligence operations during this period symbolize a profound evolution in warfare, highlighting the power of ideas and the ability to create a reality through artifice, ultimately reshaping the landscape of modern conflict. As the tide of World War II turned increasingly against the Axis powers, British intelligence operations shifted towards a more aggressive phase of disinformation aimed at the German military. The culmination of years of experience in espionage and counter-espionage had honed the abilities of MI5 and MI6 operatives to craft narratives that could mislead and manipulate. The use of false messages had become an art form, with operatives meticulously planning operations that would sow confusion among enemy ranks. This intricate web of deception was not merely a side note in the broader strategy. It was a linchpin that held together the Allies' approach to warfare and ultimately shaped the outcome of the conflict. One significant operation that exemplified this strategy was the Operation Fortitude, which was aimed at misleading the German forces about the location of the D-Day invasion. British intelligence orchestrated a complex facade involving dummy tanks, fake radio traffic, and even the careful creation of fictitious personas. For months, they led German command to believe that the Allies would launch their main assault on the Pas de Calais, a location that was much closer to Britain than the actual target of Normandy. The careful construction of this narrative was aimed not only at diverting attention, but also at creating an environment of uncertainty within German high command, forcing them to spread their resources thin while attempting to cover multiple potential landing sites. Underpinning this operation was the understanding that information is not just a tool of war, it is a weapon. Each false message generated by British intelligence was a carefully designed breadcrumb, leading German troops down a path of misjudgment. The deliberate orchestration of these messages created a psychological impact. British operatives recognized that the burden of uncertainty could be as disruptive to morale as actual combat. As German forces desperately tried to decipher the true intentions of their enemies, the Allies were able to keep the upper hand strategically, transforming the battlefield into a realm where perception often trumped reality. The success of these misinformation campaigns was not merely due to the sophistication of the tactics employed, but also reflected the profound influence of human psychology on warfare. The British understood that fear and doubt could infiltrate even the most disciplined of militaries. As German commanders grappled with the implications of contradictory intelligence, they found their decision-making hampered by suspicion and second-guessing. This paralysis allowed the Allies to maneuver with greater agility on actual battlefields, a harbinger of the impending defeat of German forces. British operatives were particularly adept at utilizing forged documents that appeared authentic, which they dropped in strategic locations. These documents were designed to leak information that would reach the German high command, often in convoluted forms. By introducing plausible but false information, they created a fog of uncertainty that engulfed German intelligence efforts. The psychological warfare inherent in this method became evident when senior German officers, unsure of their own communications and sources, began to treat even legitimate reports with skepticism, a diversion of focus that proved detrimental to their strategic planning. Another dimension to this narrative of deception was the notion of cooperation among the Allies, particularly between the British and American forces. The collaboration extended beyond mere military logistics to encompass shared intelligence objectives, which further enriched the tapestry of misinformation. British operatives would fire off misleading cables that were designed to reach American ears, thereby creating layered disinformation that would perpetuate confusion in German evaluations. This partnership illustrated the concept of information warfare as a collective effort, rather than the sole domain of one nation, strengthening the Allies' position and showcasing the importance of unity in purpose. The culmination of these efforts came to fruition during the Normandy landings of June 6, 1944. As thousands of Allied troops stormed the beaches of France, German forces remained largely convinced that the main assault would come elsewhere. The high degree of successful deception had kept critical reinforcements from reaching Normandy in time, a direct result of the British spying operations that had fed false expectations into the German command structure. In this instance, the machinery of misinformation had not only altered perceptions, but had also significantly affected the real-time operational capabilities of the enemy. In retrospect, the role played by British spies in the War of Information illustrates the nuanced interplay of deception, strategy, and psychological warfare. Their success lay not only in the intelligence gathered, but also in the crafted narratives delivered with precision to mislead the enemy. The legacy of these operations serves as a stark reminder of the power embedded in the art of persuasion and the subtler forms of warfare that extend beyond bullets and bombs. The British approach to information war fundamentally shaped the outcomes of key battles, underscoring the importance of maintaining an upper hand not just on the battlefield, but in the minds of opponents. Ultimately, the meticulous efforts of British intelligence during World War II redefined the landscape of military operations and established a precedent for future conflicts. The intelligence community learned that the truth can often be the most potent weapon when wielded with intention and skill. The lessons derived from these actions resonate through the annals of military history, a testament to the reality that wars are not always won through brute force alone. Sometimes they are won in the shadows, through the calculated manipulation of information. As we reflect on the intricate web woven by British intelligence during a pivotal moment in history, we are reminded of the profound impact of perception in warfare. The deliberate dissemination of misleading information to German forces not only exemplified the strategic cunning of British operatives, but also illuminated the ethical complexities inherent in such tactics. These actions raise important questions about the nature of truth in times of conflict, the responsibilities of those in power to their own people, and the broader consequences of deception. The echoes of these decisions resonate through the corridors of history, prompting us to consider the balance between necessity and morality in the pursuit of victory. As we engage with this narrative, we are charged with the responsibility of understanding that the legacies of war extend far beyond the battlefield. They shape national identities and influence contemporary discourse on intelligence and ethics. Thus, the story of how wrong messages were sent to German troops serves not merely as a historical account, but as a cautionary tale, urging us to reflect on the enduring complexities of human decision-making in the face of existential threats. In recognizing this past, we are called to navigate our present with wisdom and integrity,